Grief did not arrive as weeping for Guinevere Bloodmoon. It arrived as arithmetic. One heartbeat under her palm, one heartbeat gone forever. One knife still sticky in her grip because she had been too slow by half a breath. Pacts like to call fate sacred when it spared the powerful and instructive when it crushed the rest. In the cold light before dawn, watching her mate's funeral pyre fold inward on itself, she understood the harsher law beneath every oath. If a woman could not be useful, she would be named dangerous. If she carried blood others feared, she would be hunted in the language of virtue. The pyre cracked and dropped, orange light caving into ash. Kieran's wolf-hide cloak blackened at the edges and vanished under falling timber. Guinevere stood through all of it with one hand spread over the child turning low beneath her ribs, and the other wrapped around the knife that had failed him. Her knuckles ached from refusing to let go. Smoke stung her throat until every breath felt scraped raw. No one touched her. Two elders from her former pack watched from the perimeter stones, their mourning bands tied correctly, their faces carefully blank. When she looked toward them, the older one lowered his gaze, as if even sympathy might be interpreted as disloyalty. She should not remain in Riverfall territory, the younger said, not quietly enough. Valewood's men are searching bloodlines. We cannot invite reprisals. The older answered, she has widow right to temporary shelter. Temporary, the younger repeated. Very temporary. Guinevere did not answer either of them. She placed Kieran's signet, now too hot to hold, at the edge of the pit, and stepped back before her knees gave out. The child kicked once, hard enough to make her fold around her middle. Pain flared through her side where a blade had grazed her in the ambush that killed him. She had stitched it herself, badly, under moonlight, because no healer wanted to be seen entering her room. By nightfall she was moved, not invited, to the widow's safe house beyond the Western Tannery Road. The place had once been a granary. Now it held narrow cots, wool curtains for privacy, and women who kept their voices low as if volume itself attracted punishment. A carved moon charm hung over the entrance, cracked clean through the center. Mara, the safe housekeeper, met Guinevere at the threshold with a basin and a fixed smile that did not reach her eyes. You can have cot 7. No fires after midnight, no visitors. If patrols ask, you were never here. I only need a few days, Guinevere said. Mara glanced at Guinevere's belly, then at the knife still strapped to her forearm. Few days is all anyone gives now. The room smelled of iron, old soap, and fear. A young widow on the next cot offered Guinevere half a heel of bread without speaking. Another woman turned her face to the wall and pulled her blanket higher. In the corner, a basket held burned clothing waiting to be mended. Someone had folded tiny shirts beside bandages. Guinevere sat, unwrapped Kieran's blade, and cleaned soot from the handle with the edge of her sleeve. She had done this every night since the ambush, a ritual more than a task. Keep the blade, keep the child, keep moving. Those were the only instructions her mind accepted. When sleep came, it was ragged. In the deepest dark, she woke with her pulse hammering and her palm clamped over her throat. Sure, she felt a hand there. The room was still. Rain tapped the roof in thin, relentless lines. She counted breaths until the shaking eased, then pressed both hands to her abdomen and waited for movement. There. A turn. Alive. The next day brought whispers from every market runner who stopped at the safe house gate. Drake Valewood's riders had taken a shrine from East Bank. A midwife disappeared near the Marsh Road. 2 pregnant wolves from Stonecross were gone after evening prayers. By dusk, forged decrees were circulating under council seals that looked genuine at first glance, ordering the transfer of prophecy blood carriers to neutral custody. Neutral meant unmarked graves. Mara barred the shutters before moonrise. If they ask, we hold no one by that name. Guinevere looked up from repacking her satchel. They already know my name. No. Mara said, voice tightening. They know what you carry. 3 nights after Kieran's pyre, hoofbeats struck the road like thrown stones. Not patrol rhythm. Too fast. Too many. The women in the safe house froze at once, bodies trained by repetition to read danger before sound became words. Guinevere was on her feet when the first torch hit the roof. Dry cedar caught like oil. Heat rolled down from the rafters. Smoke thickened in a breath. Someone screamed from the rear cot line. Mara shouted, "Back door, now, move." A second torch shattered against the wall near cot 7, showering sparks over wool blankets. Fire licked upward, greedy and clean. Through the front slit window, Guinevere saw riders in ash-gray masks dismount with practiced calm. Not a raid for plunder. A message operation. One of them carried a long stone tablet wrapped in red cloth. Another dragged a bucket of pitch and painted symbols over the gate in broad black strokes. A rider tore off his mask and called toward the burning house, his voice amplified by the courtyard walls. Hear decree of the Pure Line. The blood moon womb must be emptied before the red moon rises. Harborers will be purged with her. The women around Guinevere made low, terrified sounds she would remember later, because they were not quite cries and not quite words. She grabbed the nearest widow by both shoulders and pushed her toward the back corridor. Go. Keep low. Do not stop for anything. Flames crawled along the ceiling beams. A support post groaned. Guinevere wrapped a wet cloth over her mouth, then dropped to one knee as pain tightened across her lower belly, sharp and sudden. Not labor. Stress, spasm. She breathed through it anyway, counting in sets of 4. The child shifted, unsettled but steady. Outside, the rider spoke again, almost conversational. Send her out and the rest live. Mara stood by the rear latch, smoke streaking her face. We cannot hold this door much longer. Guinevere's mind split cleanly between terror and calculation. Stay, and they would search every room, every ditch, every body. Run with the group, and her scent would lead them straight to women already marked for death by association. Surrender, and Drake got what he wanted. Blood moon blood for whatever right he was building. None of the choices were safe. One was useful. She pressed Kieran's knife into Mara's hand. Take them to the tannery culvert. Follow the river stones west until dawn. Do not light anything. Mara shook her head once, violently. If you go out there, they will follow me. Guinevere took the knife back, gentler this time, and slid it into the seam she had cut inside her cloak. That is the point. Timbers cracked overhead. Embers rained in bright arcs. The back latch blew inward from a kick, and cold night air rushed in carrying smoke, horse sweat, and pitch. The riders had circled faster than expected. Decision made itself. Guinevere vaulted a fallen bench, shouldered through the split rear door, and dropped into mud behind the ash pit. The impact jarred her hips and shot pain up her spine. She kept moving. Behind her, voices rose. There. Red cloak. Take her alive. She cut left through the tannery lane where vats of lye and old hides turned the air caustic enough to blur scent trails. A crossbow bolt thunked into the fence post beside her. Another skipped off stone and vanished into dark water. She did not look back. The child kicked again, frantic now, and she talked under her breath as she ran, words torn by breath and smoke. We are not dying here. We are not dying here. At the riverbank, she slid down shale, boots skidding, and waded into knee-deep current despite the cold slicing through her skirts. Water swallowed her scent for a few precious minutes. She moved downstream, bent nearly double, one arm cradling her belly, the other steadying herself on slick rock. Twice she stumbled. Twice she caught herself before falling. Behind her, rider whistles split and regrouped, confused by the river bend. Near dawn, she reached the old border marker where Riverfall territory ended and the law ended with it. The carved sigil of Darkhollow had been hacked in half years ago during the purge. No patrols came here now. No harvest teams. No temple messengers. Only ruins, feral packs, and stories told to keep children from wandering. She rested her forehead against the broken stone and shook until the worst of the cold passed. Her side wound had reopened under the strain. Warm wetness spread beneath her bandage. She tightened it with shaking fingers and kept going. By the time the sky paled, the world had narrowed to sensation. Bramble tearing at her sleeves, damp earth sucking at her boots, crows rising from dead pines in startled waves. Every few minutes she stopped to listen for hoofbeats. None came. Either she had lost them, or they had gone wide to cut her off at the ridge. On the far slope she saw it at last, the shattered Darkhollow hall, half-roofed, smoke lifting from one rebuilt chimney. Not abandoned then, not entirely dead. Figures moved along the outer wall carrying timber, too organized for scavengers. Wolves, maybe. Oathbreakers, maybe. A last refuge or a trap with better architecture. Guinevere placed one hand over her child, tasted ash on the back of her tongue, and walked toward whatever waited at the threshold because there was nowhere else left to go. The slope leveled into a yard of broken flagstone and fresh-cut pine, and the contradiction of it nearly undid her. Half the outer wall still wore scorch marks from an old siege, black streaks climbing toward a roof that no longer existed, yet new beams had been raised between the ruins with stubborn precision. Smoke from a cook fire drifted through the gap where a tower had fallen. Someone had hung laundry between two spear racks. Someone had planted winter kale in old arrow pits. This was not a den of raiders. It was work. Survival work. Guinevere took another step and her knee buckled. She caught herself on a post carved long ago with the Darkhollow crest, the wolf's head split by an axe cut but still visible beneath moss. Her palm left a smear of diluted blood from her reopened side wound. The cold had numbed it through the march. Now pain returned in clear, punishing waves. A horn sounded once from the west parapet. Not alarm. Notice. 3 wolves appeared along the wall walk, bows lowered but ready. None wore matching armor. One had a patched leather brace and a scar across his jaw. Another leaned slightly on a spear as if favoring an old hip injury. The third, a woman with iron-gray braids looped tight at her nape, looked straight at Guinevere's belly before she looked at her face. "Stop at the marker stone," the braided woman called. "Hands where I can see them." Guinevere lifted both hands slowly, then grimaced and lowered her right to brace her abdomen. "I am not armed for you." The braided woman's gaze went to the tear in Guinevere's cloak seam, where a blade hilt was barely hidden. That statement has technical weaknesses. For one startled second, humor struck like a splinter of light through smoke. Then it was gone, swallowed by exhaustion. "I am asking sanctuary," Guinevere said. "One day, one night. I leave at dawn." "Name?" She hesitated, and the courtyard shifted with it. More movement behind the gate arch. A pair of younger wolves hauling timber paused to listen. An elder crossing with a basket of herbs stopped mid-step, face tightening as if she recognized trouble by scent alone. Guinevere Bloodmoon. Silence hit hard. Even the hammering from somewhere inside the hall cut off. The braided woman descended the stairs with 2 guards at her back and stopped just outside striking distance. Up close, her age showed in the lines around her eyes, but her stance carried a veteran's balance, weight-centered, ready for sudden violence. "You picked a dangerous name to walk in here with." "I did not pick it." The woman's mouth thinned, something like reluctant respect crossing her face. "I am Tamsin, acting gate captain until our Alpha returns from the East Ridge. If Valewood sent you as bait, you will die first and question marks can come later. If Valewood had me, I would not be standing." "Maybe. Maybe not. He likes theater." Guinevere swayed. The courtyard tilted, righted itself. She focused on Tamsin's left shoulder, on the frayed stitching there, because if she looked at every possible exit, she would bolt and fall before she reached one. I crossed the river on foot, she said. Your north marker still has half the old sigil. I came through birch scrub and dead pine. No riders behind me in the last 6 miles. Tamsin studied her too long, weighing truth against risk. How many followed you from Riverfall? 8 at the safe house. Could be more now. At the word safe house, the elder with the herb basket closed her eyes briefly, grief and anger braided into one small movement. One of the younger wolves muttered a curse under his breath. By the time the sun cleared the eastern ridge, Guinevere could no longer feel 2 fingers on her left hand, and the child had gone unnervingly still after hours of frantic movement. Tamsin made a sharp hand signal. Merrick, check her trail to the lower bend. Ilya, wake the healers and tell them no panic in front of the little ones. She looked back to Guinevere. You take 1 step wrong and you lose the privilege of breathing in this yard, understood? Understood. They escorted her through the gate, not touching, weapons angled low but present. Inside, Dark Hollow's ruin opened wider than it had from the slope. Scaffolds against cracked stone, smith tables improvised from old doors, children's chalk marks on a surviving wall where someone had drawn wolves with oversized paws and crowns. 2 boys carrying kindling froze when they saw Guinevere, then hurried off toward the kitchens after Tamsin nodded at them. No one screamed, no one pointed. They simply watched, cautious and alert, as if they had learned that disaster often arrived wearing a familiar face. Guinevere made it 12 steps into the inner court before her vision narrowed to a tunnel. Sit her down, someone said. Do not grab me, Guinevere snapped, more raw than fierce. The words scraped her throat. I said no one touches. The world lurched, her foot slid on loose gravel. She pitched forward, one hand flying to shield her belly, and waited for Stone. Arms caught her instead, hard and controlled, one at her back, one under her forearm, arresting the fall without jarring her middle. Heat pressed through rain-cold fabric. A scent hit her in the same instant, clean and feral, storm pine and iron and distant snow, and every remaining thread of her composure snapped taut. The man holding her was taller than anyone in the courtyard by a head, broad-shouldered under a plain dark coat streaked with sawdust. No ceremonial cloak. No jeweled torque. His hair was black at the roots with a single silver strand at one temple, as if winter had touched him early and refused to leave. A half-healed scar crossed his lower lip, pale against tanned skin. His hands were rough with labor, not soft with command. Alistair Darkhollow, she realized a beat later, because everyone around them had gone very still in a way that had nothing to do with rank, and everything to do with force contained by choice. He looked down at her as if she were both a wound and a revelation. Then it happened. A hot line tore through her chest from sternum to sternum, not pain exactly, more like a buried wire yanked into light. Her pulse slammed once, twice, then doubled hard enough to make her gasp. A low thrum built beneath her skin, ancient and startled awake, and the numb distance she had carried since Kieran's death cracked apart so fast it felt like vertigo. The child kicked, violent and sudden, one sharp strike beneath her ribs that stole her breath. Alistair inhaled sharply, the sound small and involuntary for such a large man. Amber flooded his irises, consuming the gray in a single sweep, predator and protector surfacing together. His knees bent as if the ground had shifted under him. He caught himself, then took one step back from her, hands lifting away despite instinct, reverence written in the restraint. The courtyard erupted in whispers. No, Guinevere heard herself say, though she did not know which part she was refusing. No, I already... Her thoughts broke into present tense fragments, bright and merciless. I am not free to feel this. I burned one vow already. I cannot betray the dead by living. I cannot carry this child through another war of men who call possession devotion. If this is the moon mocking me, I will not kneel. If this is real, I am in deeper danger than any blade could make. Alistair's gaze never left hers. Something ancient looked out through his eyes and then softened, not with pity, with recognition so complete it made her want to run and collapse at the same time. Tamsin, he said quietly, still watching Guinevere. Lock the outer gates, double the ridge watch. No one sends a raven without my seal. Tamsin hesitated only a fraction. You are certain? Do it. She moved. Alistair lowered himself to one knee in front of Guinevere, making his height less of a threat, palms open on his thighs where she could see them. Up close, she saw the faint glow of old runes under the skin of his forearms, banked embers rather than showy power. His voice came low and steady. You are safe inside my walls. There is no safe, she said. His jaw tightened, acknowledging rather than arguing. Then there is guarded. A healer arrived with a basin and clean strips. Guinevere flinched when the woman reached for her cloak, and Alistair spoke before anyone else could. No one touches her without consent. The words landed like a command and a promise together. The healer stepped back at once, waiting. Guinevere stared at Alistair, at the impossible gentleness in a face built for war, and managed one strained nod. He did not touch her again. He only shifted his body half a span closer, a shield without enclosure, and looked at her, as if every choice was still hers to make. Around them, Dark Hollow resumed movement in careful increments, work restarting in muted rhythm. Hammer on nail, bucket on stone, distant voices from the kitchen, life, refusing ruin. Guinevere pressed trembling fingers to the place above her heart, where the bond still burned like a newly forged mark, and met Alistair's eyes again, locked there, caught between grief and a future she had not asked for. While the child within her turned once more as if answering a call, she could no longer pretend she had not heard. The kick inside her eased, and with it came a wave of weakness so sudden she had to grip the edge of a broken stone trough to stay upright. Alistair rose in one fluid motion, still leaving distance between them, and angled his body toward the inner hall. Healer's room is warmer than this yard, he said. You choose who enters. You choose who stays. Guinevere searched his face for the familiar signs she had learned to fear in powerful men. Calculation, hunger. The quick, possessive triumph that followed public recognition. She found strain instead, and discipline held so tightly it looked almost painful. Tamsin goes with me, she said. Tamsin answered from behind them. I am already moving. Guinevere nodded once. And no one sends word to Riverfall. No one, Alistair said. On my name. He walked half a step ahead through the corridor of salvaged timbers and old stone, clearing a path without laying a hand on her. Wolves moved aside as they passed, curiosity held in check by rank and by the hard line of Tamsin's expression. They entered a chamber that had once been a records room. Now shelves held dried herbs, clean cloth, jars of rendered fat, and a kettle steaming over banked coals. The window was shuttered against drafts. A small cot stood near the wall, rebuilt from two different frames. The healer, Ilia, washed her hands in silence and looked to Guinevere, not to Alistair. Permission to examine the side wound. Guinevere swallowed. Yes, only the wound. Alistair turned his back while Ilia cut away the soaked bandage. That courtesy, minor as it was, unsettled her more than pressure might have. Men who believed they owned outcomes rarely bothered with modesty. The gash had split wide at the upper edge. Ilia muttered under her breath about stubborn patience and river crossings, then cleaned and stitched with swift, competent fingers. Guinevere bit down on the inside of her cheek and watched the steam coil from the kettle. Alistair remained where he stood, facing the door, listening to every sound beyond it. When Ilia finished, She pressed fresh linen and stepped back. No lifting, no running, no heroics for at least 2 days. That request is poorly timed, Guinevere said, voice rough. Ilya snorted once, a brief crack in the tension. Then ignore me with full awareness. Alistair finally faced them again. Food will come here. You can rest. I asked for 1 day, Guinevere said. I keep my agreements. He held her gaze. And I keep mine. 1 day means 1 day without coercion. Tamsin escorted Ilya out, then shut the door most of the way, leaving it cracked by a hand's width. Guarded, not caged. The distinction registered despite herself. When the room emptied, Guinevere sat on the cot and stared at her own palms. Soot had worked into the lines of her skin, black half-moons under her nails, reminders of flames and ash that no water at the river had taken away. Her chest still carried that taut bond heat, a bright thread she refused to name. I am not ready for this. I am not ready for any of this. I am stitched together by stubbornness and fear, and everyone can smell both. If I close my eyes, I still hear Kieran falling. If I open them, I find another man whose presence reaches inside me where grief has lived like iron. I need walls. I need rules. I need one corner of this night where no one asks me to choose between loyalty and survival. I will not be handled into gratitude. I will not be traded for protection dressed as kindness. If he is like the rest, I will see it. I always see it eventually. A soft knock came against the half-open door. Enter, she said. Alistair stepped in carrying a shallow basin of warm water and a folded cloth. No attendants, no witnesses. He set the basin on a low stool by the cot and remained standing, hands visible. May I sit there? He asked, pointing to the floor near her boots. The question startled a short, humorless breath out of her. You are Alpha here. I asked about your space, not my rank. After a pause, she nodded. He lowered himself to the stone floor, back against the wall, and waited. The kettle hissed softly. From the courtyard came the faint rhythm of hammer blows tapering into evening quiet. You are shaking, he said. I have been running for days. I know. He dipped the cloth, wrung it out, and held it out to her rather than reaching first. May I clean your hands? Soot traps infection. You can do it yourself if you prefer. Guinevere looked at the cloth, then at him, then offered her right hand, and hated that the motion felt like trust when she had not granted it yet. He worked carefully, wiping each finger and knuckle as if the task mattered on its own terms. Warmth seeped into skin gone stiff with cold. When he reached a scrape near her thumb, he paused. More pressure or less? Less. He adjusted at once. The restraint in him was not theatrical. It had the texture of practice. The habits of someone who had learned that power without consent curdled into harm. She watched his face as he cleaned the heel of her palm and found a deep weariness at the corners of his mouth. Why rebuild here? She asked quietly, when Dark Hollow fell years ago. Because no one else wanted the broken ones. His eyes stayed on her hand. Because children from 3 dissolved packs were sleeping in barns and culverts. Because elders with old loyalties and no teeth left to fight with were being priced by winter grain. Because I am tired of councils calling exile mercy. He set her right hand gently in her lap and asked for the left. She gave it. When both palms were clean, he rinsed the cloth and folded it with military neatness. Then he reached into his pocket and took out 3 lengths of dyed cord, wolf hair braided into the center strand, tiny bone bead at the end carved with a crescent. My mother made these for scouts, he said. Charm for safe return. We tie them for wolves who travel unguarded. The room narrowed around that word. Unguarded. He looked up. May I put it on your wrist? Guinevere held out her arm. His fingers were warm and calloused as he knotted the cord loosely enough not to press the pulse point. He did not linger after tying it, only checked the fit and drew back. "Thank you," she said, uncertain what else to call the ache gathering under her ribs. He leaned his head against the wall and spoke without ornament. "I will guard your child, even if you never choose me. I will guard you if you refuse me. Those are separate promises, and I mean both." The words struck harder than any claim. No bargain, no leverage, no demand for emotional payment on a debt she had not agreed to incur. "Why?" she asked, and heard the fracture in the question. "Because protection is not ownership," he said. "Because the bond recognized you, but that does not erase your dead. Because I have seen what men build when they call women vessels and unborn lives bargaining chips, and I would rather lose my title than resemble them." By the time moonrise silvered the broken parapet outside, Guinevere had eaten broth in slow sips and drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, still in her clothes, one hand curved around the cord at her wrist. The nightmare came with smoke and hoofbeats and the scrape of a blade at her throat. She came awake with a ragged cry, clawing at blankets that had twisted around her legs like restraints. The room was dark, except for ember light. A silhouette moved near the door and stopped immediately. "Guinevere," Alistair's voice, low and grounded. "It is me. I am by the threshold." She could hear him breathing, controlled but alert, as if he had been standing watch for longer than he would admit. The old panic did not care. Her pulse battered her ribs, every nerve prepared to fight or bolt. "Do not touch me," she gasped. "I will not." A beat. "Do you want light?" "Yes." He lit one lantern and set it on the floor far from the cot, bright enough to banish shadows, not so bright it hurt. Then he sat where she could see both hands, palms up on his knees. "Count with me," he said. 4 in, 6 out. She hated the command in any form, yet his tone held no edge of control, only an offered rhythm. She matched it anyway. After several breaths, the shaking eased from violent to bearable. He waited through every pause. When her breathing steadied, he said, "Do you want me to stay?" Guinevere looked at the door, at the narrow strip of corridor beyond, at the man who had asked permission more times in one evening than most alphas asked in a lifetime. "Yes," she whispered. "Stay there." He inclined his head. "I am here." Morning brought counsel. Dark Hollow's great hall had been partially restored, roofed in sections so sunbeams fell through open gaps, and striped the long table with light. Stone wolves flanked the old hearth, one missing its jaw, both draped now with fresh garlands from the kitchen garden as if someone refused to leave any relic only broken. Guinevere entered with Tamsin and took the chair offered near the side wall, close enough to hear, far enough to leave quickly if needed. Alistair stood at the head of the table in a plain black shirt, sleeves rolled to reveal faint rune lines at his forearms. Around him gathered the surviving structure of Dark Hollow. Tamsin at his right, Ilya with records, 2 scarred ward captains, and 3 elders whose expressions had weathered into permanent suspicion. Rain ticked against the high windows. Elder Corvin, thin as a spear haft and just as sharp, spoke first. "Our scouts confirm Valewood riders near the southern pass. We should not pretend this is random movement." Elder Sarah folded her hands. "Then we stop pretending sanctuary is free. The woman's presence paints a target on every child sleeping under this roof." Guinevere kept her spine straight and stared at the table grain. She had heard versions of this argument in every pack that ever praised compassion in public and rationed it in private. Corvin did not bother to lower his voice. "Surrender her at the river marker under witness. Offer neutral exchange. We keep our people alive." Tamsin's chair scraped stone. Neutral exchange to whom? The same cult-burning widow houses. "Do not dress sentiment as strategy," Corvin snapped. "Dark Hollow cannot survive a doctrine war." Alistair had been silent, listening until silence itself became pressure. Then he stepped forward, and the air in the hall tightened. "She is under my protection," he said. "That is not a negotiable clause." Sarah's mouth thinned. "You met her yesterday." "I recognized her yesterday." "Recognized," Corvin repeated with a bitter edge, "or claimed." The last word landed wrong, and everyone knew it. Alistair's shoulders went rigid. Amber bled into his irises as the predator surfaced, not a full shift, but enough to draw a collective stillness from the room. His canines lengthened, claws broke at his fingertips and scored shallow arcs into the table's edge with a sound like stone being written upon. "If any wolf in this hall calls her burden instead of blood," he said, voice deepened by the strain of form held halfway, "that wolf answers me in challenge. Here. Now." No one moved. The threat was not theatrical. It carried the old law, costly and public. Corvin glanced away first. Sarah tried a different weapon. "Widows bring ruin. Every archive says the same. Death follows them. Packs fracture around them. We invite famine and feud by tying ourselves to grief." Guinevere rose before she could stop herself, chair legs scraping. "Then remove me from your table. I will not have my dead used as your omen." She turned toward the door. Alistair crossed the space and planted himself in the archway, not touching her, simply occupying the exit with unarguable presence. His gaze met hers, then lifted to the council behind her. "She does not stand alone again," he said. The sentence struck through the hall like a bell. Tamsin exhaled slowly. Ilya set down her quill with deliberate care. Even Corvin seemed to understand that a line had been drawn, which could not be smudged back into committee language. Alistair stepped aside then, opening the door rather than trapping it. Choice returned. Guinevere did not leave. She walked back to her chair and sat, pulse loud in her ears, the wolf charm cord warm against her wrist. A wall she had not known she still defended loosened a fraction, enough for breath to move differently through her chest. She did not name it trust yet. Trust was built in repeated actions, not dramatic declarations. But as rain softened to mist against the windows and the council bent, reluctantly, toward plans that did not require her surrender, she let herself consider a thought that had felt unreachable the day before. Guarded could become safe if the one holding the wall kept choosing restraint over possession, and kept choosing it when everyone was watching. A fist struck the outer hall door, 3 sharp knocks in a scout rhythm that cut through the council's uneasy quiet. Tamsin turned first, hand already on her knife, and a mud-streaked runner slipped inside with rain in his hair, and a wrapped parcel clutched to his chest as if it burned. "Southwatch intercepted a rider at the Ash Bridge," he said, breath still high from sprinting. "Not one of ours. He swallowed poison when pinned, but we got his satchel." He laid it on the table. The leather was stamped with no pack crest, only a circle bisected by a vertical line, then crossed again by smaller cuts like tally marks. Guinevere felt cold along her spine. She had seen that symbol painted in pitch on the widow's safe-house gate. Alistair did not open the satchel immediately. He looked at Ilya. Gloves. Ilya passed oiled cloth gloves from her kit. Corvin made a derisive sound at the caution, but it died when Alistair unfolded the first document and everyone saw the council seals. Riverfall, Stonecross, East Bank. Even 2 marks from extinct hill packs that should never have had standing to issue decrees at all. Forgery, but expert forgery. Wax impressions near perfect, language precise, all ordering temporary transfer of high-risk lineage carriers into Pure Line custody for protective isolation pending Red Moon review. Sarah whispered, almost to herself, "Protective." Guinevere stepped closer despite the stitch pulling at her side. That phrase was in the market copies, word for word. Tamsin spread the rest of the contents across the table with the tip of her dagger. Route maps with waypoints circled in red, names of midwives, delivery estimates, and a ledger column titled Anchor Viability. Besides several entries were brief notes in a crisp hand. Twin line unneeded. No sire known. Discard. Dark hollow claim uncertain. Monitor. Blood moon womb essential. Secure, intact. Her stomach rolled. The child shifted under her palm as if reading her pulse. Corvin swore under his breath. This is harvest bookkeeping. No, Alistair said, voice flattening into something colder than anger. This is doctrine disguised as administration. At the bottom of the satchel lay a thin slate wrapped in linen. When Ilya unwrapped it, runes scratched across the surface caught window light and threw it back in sickly silver. Guinevere recognized only fragments, but the pattern repeated. Knot marks between paired sigils, then deliberate cuts through each knot. Bond marks. Severed. Ilya's face drained of color. I trained under an archivist who catalogued band rights after the Northern Schism. This is lattice work for bond disruption. Her fingertip hovered, not touching. Not symbolic severance, functional severance. If completed with enough blood resonance, it could rip mating bonds loose at the nervous root. It could leave wolves unable to shift at all. The room held still. Rain tapped the shattered roofline overhead, soft and relentless, as if the sky had no stake in what people did with power. Guinevere heard Kieran's laugh from memory, the way he used to say, bond was not a chain, but a home you walked toward together. The thought collided with the slate's carved violence and left her shaking. Drake Valewood calls bloodlines corruption in public sermons, she said, each word deliberate. He tells frightened packs that gifts create hierarchy and hierarchy creates tyranny. Then he steals those same bloodlines in private to build a right no council can challenge. Sarah stared at the list of names. If he can sever bonds, he can break alliances without war. A pack pair fails. Litters do not shift. Blame falls inward. Every territory fractures itself. And he chooses pregnant wolves first, Ilya added, voice unsteady now. Maximum leverage, maximum panic. Alistair rolled the slate back into linen as if containing poison. He does not want reform. He wants monopoly. A second messenger appeared at the doorway, this one older, carrying a wet bundle of cloth against her chest. The hall parted for her. Mara stepped into light, soot scars still visible along one wrist, and for a breath Guinevere could not reconcile the image with memory. Then Mara looked up, and they both moved at once. Guinevere caught her forearms, careful of the bundle. You made it. Because you made him chase the wrong trail. Mara's mouth trembled, then steadied. Most of us got out through the tannery culvert. 2 were taken on the marsh road at dawn. They were asking names from your safe house list. She unfolded the cloth. Inside was the prophecy tablet from the gate, edges charred, words still legible where heat had blackened the stone but not erased it. Blood moon womb must be emptied before red moon rises. Tamsin exhaled hard. They wanted this scene? Mara nodded. They nailed copies in 3 markets by midday. And one more thing. She looked directly at Alistair, then at Guinevere. They are saying Dark Hollow is the abductor. Valewood riders delivered forged warrants with your seal to 2 border steads. Told them you were collecting pregnant women for a blood moon army. Corvin slammed a palm on the table. That lie will spread faster than correction. That is the design, Alistair said. He isolates us, then paints any rescue as confirmation. Guinevere's fingers tightened on Mara's sleeve until she forced them loose. The core of the threat finally stood in full outline, and it was worse than a raider with torches. Drake was building permission. Permission to disappear women. Permission to rewrite law as mercy. Permission to make terror look procedural. Alistair turned to the room. No one leaves alone. All patrols doubled. Ilya, copy these lists and burn the originals after ciphering. Tamsin, send ravens to every pack not already under Pure Line influence. includes seal analysis and witness marks from Mara. If they call us liars, let them call us liars with evidence in hand. Corvin opened his mouth to argue the risk of outreach, then closed it when Alistair met his eyes with feral calm. "And Guinevere?" Sarah asked quietly. Guinevere answered before Alistair could. "I stay visible. Hiding confirms his story." Alistair did not like it. She saw the refusal in his jaw. But he inclined his head. Visible and guarded. By the next dusk, the ravens had gone and the first consequences arrived. Dark Hollow's yard filled with displaced wolves from outlying steads, not yet a flood, but enough to strain stores. A pregnant baker from Eastbank arrived with her mother and no husband, carrying an official transfer order that bore Alistair's forged signature. A teenage courier delivered word that Stonecross refused all contact until Dark Hollow trafficking claims were investigated. Two neutral merchants turned their wagons away at the gate without unloading grain. Pressure did not descend in one blow. It accumulated like winter weight on a weak roof. Guinevere stood in the herb room doorway while Ilya catalogued incoming names, due dates, allergies, blood types, sleeping arrangements. Administrative mercy, she thought, is still mercy, and nearly laughed at the absurdity of finding hope in inventory columns. Alistair entered with a stack of split firewood on one shoulder because he refused to order work he would not do himself. Sweat darkened his collar despite the cold. He set the wood by the hearth and looked at her, question in his eyes instead of assumption. "Walk with me," he said. "Perimeter only, if you want." She hesitated, then nodded. They took the inner circuit where scaffolds cast long bars of shadow and children's voices drifted from the kitchen annex. He kept pace with her shortened stride without making a ceremony of accommodation. Once, when she stumbled on a loose stone, his hand lifted and stopped in midair, waiting. She chose to take his forearm for 3 steps, then let go. Neither of them commented on it. "I read the full slate translation," he said after a while. "There is a final sequence keyed to eclipse geometry. If Drake finishes the lattice, he will need a living anchor with blood moon resonance to stabilize backlash." "Me," she said. "You, or the child when old enough to survive extraction." She stopped walking. Breath left her in a thin, controlled line. The world narrowed to his face, to the brutal care with which he chose each word. Present tense seized her mind again, urgent and unsparing. "I want to run, and there is nowhere to run. I want to trust him, and trust feels like stepping onto ice while hearing it crack. I am so tired of being called vessel by men who fear what I carry. I feel him near me and my pulse answers without permission. I still love a dead man. I am beginning to love a living one. Both truths fit in the same body and tear at each other. If I choose wrong, children die. If I choose nothing, children still die. I am not choosing between men. I am choosing what kind of law my child is born under." When she looked up, Alistair was watching her with an attention that felt like shelter rather than surveillance. "Say what you need from me," he said. "No secrecy, no heroic bargains made over my head. If he wants Blood Moon, then Blood Moon decides the terms of engagement." His mouth curved without humor. That sounded very much like a queen. It sounded like a woman who is buried enough. He held her gaze for a long moment. Amber edged his irises, not predatory now, simply present, the ancient part of him close to the skin. "Then we build plans with you at the center, not behind the wall." That night, attraction and fear braided tighter, impossible to separate cleanly. She found him in the records alcove near midnight, bent over maps by lantern light, forearms bare, rune marks faintly aglow as he traced route times between ridge passes. He looked up when she entered and rose immediately, waiting for instruction. "Sit," she said, then almost smiled at the irony. He sat. She crossed to the table and placed Kieran's knife beside his map. I want this copied. Blade profile, weight, alloy. If Drake's people are collecting lineage relics, he may have catalogs. This pattern could connect to old Blood Moon archives. Alistair studied the blade with careful respect. You trust me with this. I trust your process, she corrected. But her hand brushed his as she withdrew, and neither of them moved for a breath. Heat pulsed beneath her skin. Not a storm this time. A steady, disorienting warmth that made the room feel smaller. He spoke softly. Guinevere, if closeness hurts, we pull back. It does hurt. She met his eyes. And not all pain means stop. The line between them held, alive and taut, and they returned to the maps because restraint was now a shared discipline. 3 days passed before the first raven returned from a major pack, and the answer was worse than silence. Refusal to verify seals, refusal to host witnesses, refusal to acknowledge Valewood activity without council ratification from elders already compromised by his doctrine. Attached was a polite warning that Dark Hollow mobilization would be interpreted as aggression. Corvin read the letter aloud in the Great Hall while rain hammered the roof repairs, and every sentence stripped another layer of plausible safety away. They are buying his narrative, Tamsin said. They are buying time, Alistair answered. He will use it. He did, at moonrise. The western watch horn blew once, twice, then broke into the rapid triple call reserved for live breach. Wolves surged from bunks and benches, grabbing weapons, boots, cloaks. Guinevere reached the courtyard as Tamsin sprinted in from the gate with a bloodied sleeve and fury in her face. Decoy fire at the goat sheds, Tamsin snapped. Main strike came through the drainage cut under North Wall. Fast team, masked. They took 6 pups from the schoolroom annex and 2 caretakers before we closed the gap. The words landed like a physical blow. Around them, parents were already shouting names, voices cracking on the second syllable. A riderless horse staggered through the gate bearing a lantern tied to its saddle and a slate fixed at the neck with wire. Alistair ripped the slate free and read. His expression did not change, which frightened Guinevere more than rage would have. He handed it to her. Eclipse altar at first shadow. Blood moon arrives alone, or the children bleed for your delay. At the bottom, the pure line mark. Beneath it, carved deep enough to chip stone, a final line in Drake's hand. 1 day was granted. The debt comes due tonight. The child turned hard under Guinevere's ribs as if striking a warning bell from inside her body, and she looked up to find every eye in the courtyard on her, while the night closed in around Dark Hollow's walls. No, Alistair said at once, stepping between her and the slate in her hands, as if he could block the demand by force of stance alone. He asked for you alone because he wants control of terrain and timing. We do not hand him either. Tamsin wiped rain from her brow with the back of her wrist. We can track the drainage route, hit his rear line, and pull the pups out before he stages the right. He expects that too, Guinevere said. Her voice came steadier than her pulse. He took children, not warriors. He needs us frantic and visible. Around them, parents pleaded names into the dark, and the sound carved through every argument. Alistair took the slate back, read it once more, then snapped it across his knee. Stone cracked. The mark of pure line split down the middle. Then we changed the script, he said. They moved into the map alcove at a run, wet boots marking the floor. Guinevere laid a palm over the ridge sketch and pointed to the old eclipse site east of the quarry, where the temple wall had collapsed years before and left a narrow breach by the arch. He will place the captives west, where torchlight is strongest and witness lines are clear, she said. He wants me to see them first, think with panic, and step where he chooses. The eastern arch falls into shadow during first eclipse bite. That is his blind angle. Corvin, pale and shaking but useful in crisis, spread the copied lattice translation beside her. Central sigil links to 6 knot nodes. If any 2 fire out of sequence, backlash goes lateral. Moonsault forces phase drift. Ilya said. It can desynchronize rune knots for a breath. Maybe two. Guinevere met Alistair's gaze. I walk in as ordered. Hidden salt in my hem seam. Sieren's blade in my cloak seam. I trigger the central sigil early with blood moon resonance, then cut it with salt before the lattice stabilizes. That opens your window. Alistair's jaw tightened until muscle jumped. Your window includes standing inside a live bond-severing grid while he tries to carve our child out of you. Our child survives if those children survive, she said. And if Drake completes that rite, no pack keeps children safe. Tamsin leaned over the table. I can take her place with blood scent masking. He will know, Guinevere answered. He built this for lineage. He has been tracking midwives, due dates, ancestral marks. This is not random violence. It is targeted extraction disguised as doctrine. Silence held for one beat, then Alistair braced both hands on the table and bowed his head, not in surrender, in control. Terms, he said without looking up, you set them now. No one trades themselves for me. No challenge call before the captives move. You hold until I drop my right hand to the sigil. When the eastern arch cracks, Tamsin takes children first, caretakers second. You take Drake last. Alistair lifted his head. Amber edged his irises, predator close to the surface and leashed by will. And if the lattice takes you down before the signal, then you finish it anyway. Less than an hour later, first shadow bit the moon as they reached the quarry road above the eclipse altar. The temple ruins rose from black stone like broken teeth. Torches ringed the lower court. At the center, a circle of carved runes pulsed sickly silver, 6 knot pylons linked by wire-thin chains etched with oath glyphs. To the west, 6 pups and 2 caretakers knelt inside a barred pen, wrists bound with cord. Armed cult guards stood behind them, blades visible but held still. Drake understood theater. He wanted terror to breathe before he touched it. Guinevere descended the last slope alone. Cold wind slid under her cloak. Moon salt stitched in packets along her hem, tapped lightly against her ankles with each step. Kieran's blade lay flat against her forearm, hidden in the seam cut months ago by habit and grief. She kept her shoulders level and counted the rune posts. 1, 2, 3. Drake Valewood stood at the edge of the circle in ceremonial white gone gray with ash, his hair tied back with black cord, his smile patient and bloodless. He looked less like a warlord than an officiant, which made him worse. You came without your king, he called. I came for the children. Same thing, in your mind now. He spread his hands to indicate the circle, the captives, the watching guards. History will call this mercy. One bloodline surrendered, hundreds freed from inherited tyranny. Guinevere stopped at the threshold line. You burned widow houses. I removed vectors of concentrated power. You abducted pregnant women. I intercepted genetic monopolies before they hardened into caste. His gaze dropped to her belly, then returned to her face with clinical interest. Step inside, Guinevere. Do not make them pay for your sentiment. The pups had gone rigid with fear, but one little girl met Guinevere's eyes and gave the smallest possible nod, as if she had already decided to be brave and only needed permission to continue. That nearly broke her. I am terrified. I am walking into a machine built for my body and my child. I am carrying a dead man's blade and a living bond in the same breath. I can hear Alistair somewhere above the eastern wall, waiting when every instinct in him says charge now. I can feel those children watching me, measuring whether adults are real when we promise protection. I cannot outrun this. I cannot reason with a man who calls cruelty structural correction. I can choose the angle of impact. I can choose the second he loses control. I can choose that my body is not his instrument. Fear is present. Choice is present too. Choose. She stepped into the circle. Runes brightened instantly, lines climbing the knot pylons in fast, hungry threads. Pressure built in her ears. The child twisted hard, then went still, listening from within. Drake lifted a narrow iron spike from the altar and began to chant in old legal dialect, each phrase invoking transfer, custody, severance. Guinevere lowered her right hand toward the central sigil. From the eastern dark, a stone cracked. Not loudly. Enough. She pressed her palm to the sigil and spoke the blood moon cadence backward, not as invocation, but inversion. Silver light surged up her arm, scorching cold, and the knot lines jerked out of rhythm. In the same movement, she dragged her cloak hem across the carved groove and split the salt packets with her thumb. White grains spilled in a crescent over the nearest two knot channels. The lattice screamed. Not a human sound, a metallic shriek as linked runes desynchronized and spat forth sideways. Two pylons blew apart at the carved seams, chain glyphs snapping into sparks. Torches guttered, guards flinched. Now! Tamsin's voice split the court from the eastern arch. Dark hollow wolves flooded through the breach in a low, coordinated surge, shields first, hooks second. They hit the pen line, cut cords, pulled pups behind stone cover in practiced motions drilled for exactly this kind of extraction. One caretaker stumbled. Elia, somehow there despite orders, dragged her clear by the elbow. Alistair came through last and fastest, half-shifted, claws out, eyes feral, intercepting the guard line before it could fold toward the children. Steel rang on stone. Men shouted. The temple court became motion and smoke and sharp commands. Drake recoiled, then recovered with frightening speed. "Hold the anchor!" he barked at his inner guard. "Kill any child who crosses west." A chain backlash whipped from a damaged pylon and struck his own men first, dropping two to their knees with their oaths burning off in pale streaks across their wrists. Guinevere stayed in the circle, knees shaking, and cut her palm with Kieran's blade. Blood hit the central sigil in 3 bright drops. "By blood moon witness," she said, voice carrying beyond the clash. Forced oath returns to Maker. The central glyph inverted. Every tether in Drake's lattice snapped direction. Across the court, cult brands lit silver on skin, not flame that consumed flesh, light that exposed every stolen mark at once. Guards cried out and dropped weapons, hands clamping to their own wrists as compulsion recoiled inward. The structure Drake had built to command others folded back onto him like a trap closing. He lunged into the circle with the spike raised, rage burning through composure at last. "You, ignorant vessel!" He drove the spike toward her abdomen. Guinevere caught his wrist with both hands, turned with the momentum the way Kieran had taught her in quieter years, and redirected the strike across Drake's own forearm. The spike punched through the rune brand branded there, pinning his hand to the altar lip. He shouted, shock louder than pain. Alistair hit him a heartbeat later, slamming him down at the altar edge, one clawed hand at his throat, keeping him conscious and facing the circle. Drake spat blood-tinged saliva onto the stone between them and snarled, "Bloodlines are chains." Guinevere stood over him, breath ragged, palm bleeding onto the sigil she had claimed by choice. "No, choice is the blade." She pressed her bloodied hand to the final knot mark and spoke the release phrase in full ancestral form. Silver fire raced the lattice channels, not outward now, inward through every stolen oath thread connected to Drake's brand. The pure line sigils carved around the court fractured one by one, hairline cracks turning to shattering bursts. Drake's face went slack with disbelief as power drained out of him like water from a broken cistern. "Then let prophecy burn," he rasped. "It already did," Guinevere said. The backlash stripped him of the ritual aura that had shielded him for years, leaving only a man on stone with no network to hide inside. Alistair hauled him to his knees, gave him the old law in a voice every witness could hear. "Drake Valewood, I challenge for blood crimes, oath theft, and child-taking. Drake tried to answer and found no force left in it. Alistair's strike was swift, final, and public. Drake fell at the altar he had built, and the remaining cult wolves dropped to the ground or fled into dark where Darkhollow scouts were already closing the exits. When the noise finally thinned, Guinevere swayed but did not fall. Tamsin emerged from the eastern cover with all 6 pups and both caretakers alive, faces streaked with soot and tears, counting each other by touch. Alistair turned from the body and came to the circle edge, stopping short of her until she nodded once. Only then did he step in. Only then did he step in, boots crossing the fractured sigil where silver light still crawled like cooling metal. He stopped a breath away, chest heaving, blood at his knuckles, and waited for her choice even now, even here, with witnesses ringed around them and victory sharp in the air. "Guinevere," he said, voice scraped raw. "Look at me." She did. The feral edge in him had not vanished, but it was leashed, held, offered rather than imposed. Behind him, Tamsin kept the last cult guard at blade point. Ilya knelt beside one of the rescued caretakers. Mara stood with a pup pressed to her side, eyes wet and unflinching. The whole court had gone quiet enough to hear the wind through the broken arch. Alistair lifted his hands, empty. "I can hold this bond unmarked until you decide in safety. I will, if you want me to." Her pulse shook through her ribs, through her wounded palm, through the place above her heart where the thread between them had burned since the courtyard. Grief was still there, Kieran's memory still whole, not erased by what stood before her. Love did not arrive as replacement. It arrived as expansion, fierce and terrifying and true. I am standing in ash and moonlight with blood on my skin and a child turning beneath my hand. I have been hunted, bargained over, named omen, named vessel, named burden. He has asked at every threshold. He has stood down when instinct said seize. He has guarded what is mine without demanding I become his in payment. I am done mistaking fear for wisdom. I am done calling survival a full life. I choose. I choose with clear eyes. I choose while still shaking. She stepped closer until her breath touched his throat. "Do not hold it unmarked." His eyes closed for one beat, gratitude and hunger and restraint colliding across his face. When he opened them, amber bled bright through his irises. "Tell me yes," he said. "Tell me where." "Yes." Her voice steadied as she turned her head, bearing the junction of neck and shoulder. "Here. Claim me as I claim you." A sound moved through him, low and reverent. "Witnessed," Tamsin said into the silence, formal as law. Alistair cupped the back of her neck, giving her time to pull away. She leaned in. His teeth met skin with controlled pressure, then pierced, not tearing, a precise bite that sent pain flashing white and clean through her shoulder. She gasped, fingers locking in his shirt. Heat surged immediately after, gold pouring into the silver pulse she had carried alone, 2 currents finding one channel. The ache transformed as it spread, no longer injury, a deep resonant thrum that settled behind her sternum and unfurled outward to the child beneath her ribs. The child kicked once, strong. A visible arc leapt between their marks, gold braided with silver, brief and brilliant in the ruined court. Wolves around the circle drew breath as one. Alistair released her at once, pressing his forehead to hers, shaking now in a way no enemy had managed to make him shake. "Mine," he whispered, "not possession, recognition." She touched the fresh mark at her neck, then slid her hand to his shoulder and pushed his torn collar aside. "Yours," she answered. And when his head tilted in offering, throat exposed, she understood the magnitude of that trust from a king, built to guard his vulnerabilities like borders. She bit him at the shoulder, deeper than he had bitten her, enough to taste salt and iron and moon sweat, enough to leave certainty. Pain cracked through her jaw and turned to the same flooding warmth, mutual this time, the bond snapping fully into place with a force that nearly dropped them both. Images flickered across it in blinding fragments, his hands rebuilding beams in a ruined hall, her running river cold through darkness, children drawing wolves with crowns in chalk, a cracked moon charm over a widow door, a future table crowded and loud and safe. He made a rough sound against her hair. Mate. Mate, she echoed, and the word landed where all the others had failed. When they finally drew back, the marks on both their shoulders glowed faintly, then settled to a living heat under skin. The wild pressure in the court eased. Alistair wrapped her in his arms carefully, one hand splayed over the curve of her belly, the other braced between her shoulder blades as if relearning where her body ended and his duty began. No one cheered. They witnessed. That mattered more. By dawn, the altar had become a crime scene under guard instead of a stage for terror. Elia catalogued every piece in a ledger with wax-sealed tags, the forged decrees from Drake's satchel, the route maps naming stolen women, the lattice slate fragments, the iron spike still marked with Drake's brand, the prophecy tablet taken from the widow's safehouse gate, and the broken Pure Line sigils gathered in cloth sacks. Tamsin sent Merrick with copies to the same packs that had refused the first ravens, this time with captive testimony under oath and seal analysis from 3 neutral scribes. Corvin himself pressed Darkhollow's seal into the packet and signed as witness, jaw tight with the cost of being wrong in public. 3 days later, the great hall filled wall to wall for tribunal. Emissaries from Stonecross and East Bank stood under the rebuilt rafters beside freed captives, midwives, and caretakers. Mara testified first, voice steady as she described the widow's safehouse fire and the wording of the threat tablet. Elia presented the bond-severing lattice translation and demonstrated the forged wax seams under magnified glass. A Stonecross envoy who had rejected Darkhollow's warning lowered his head and admitted their delay had enabled 2 abductions. He did not ask forgiveness. He submitted names and routes. Sarah rose next. She faced Guinevere in full view of the hall. I called Widow's ruin. I was wrong. Her voice did not waver. I request assignment to nursery and sanctuary duty until those harmed by my words decide whether I have earned any other place. Corvin followed, older and grimmer. I argued surrender as strategy. It was fear wearing reason's coat. He set his elder torque on the table. I step down from vote power and retain only seal forensics and archive repair, if accepted. Guinevere looked to Alistair, then back to them. Accepted with record. She turned to the scribes. Write this clause in the covenant. No pregnant wolf may be transferred across territory under coercion, decree pressure, or ritual pretext. Maternal consent is sovereign. Sanctuary status overrides pack debt. Quills raced across parchment. One by one, pack seals pressed hot wax. At moonrise the same night, the claiming circle was redrawn in the courtyard, not in fear this time, in celebration. The cracked moon charm from the old widow's safehouse hung repaired above Darkhollow's gate, silver wire mending its split center without hiding the break. Children had redrawn their chalk wolves along the inner wall, crowns larger now, beside a new figure with a braid and a raised knife. Tamsin stood as first witness, Elia as second. Mara carried the covenant roll. Marek held the torchline. Even the 2 Riverfall elders from Kieran's pyre came forward at the edge of the crowd. The older bowed and the younger, unable to meet Guinevere's eyes, still signed the protection charter with a shaking hand. Alistair knelt before her in formal vow posture, then rose when she pulled him up because she would not be sworn to from above. They spoke together, palms over each other's marks. One day, she said, tears bright and unhidden. The rest of our lives, he answered. The rebuilt hall answered with wolf voices, not a war cry, a home call. When the silver circlet of Luna Queen settled into Guinevere's hair, it felt less like elevation than alignment, title meeting labor already done. She signed the final covenant page as Guinevere Bloodmoon Darkhollow, recognized mate, steward of sanctuary law, and every displaced wolf in the yard was counted into protection before the fires burned low. Later, with quiet at last around them, she and Alistair stood beneath the mended charm, his hand warm over hers on her belly as their child turned strong and certain between them, and dawn no longer felt like borrowed time.